Have you ever dreamed of sailing beyond the horizon? I have. My name is Emily, and today I'll take you on a journey of imagination. We'll follow Gulliver, a man whose curiosity pushed him across oceans and into worlds unlike our own. This is not just a story about travel, it's a lesson about who we are, what we value, and how small we can be in a vast world. Through tiny people, towering giants, and flying islands, Gulliver discovers truths that still matter today. Each adventure brings a new mirror to humanity, showing pride, kindness, and wisdom in unexpected forms. So take a breath, close your eyes, and picture the waves. Let's set sail together. Let's learn, reflect, and dream through the story of Gulliver's travels. When we talk about adventure, we often imagine danger and discovery. But for Gulliver, it began with curiosity. He was a doctor from England, a man who loved books about the sea. Since childhood, he had dreamed of seeing the world. He wasn't looking for fame or fortune. He was chasing the feeling of wonder, that quiet thrill of the unknown. Every page he read about ships and voyages lit a spark inside him. He wanted to see the oceans with his own eyes. So when the chance came, he didn't hesitate. A ship was looking for a doctor. He packed his tools, kissed his family goodbye, and joined the crew. That moment changed his life forever. The ship was his new home. Wooden decks, creaking ropes, and endless blue horizons. At first, the sea felt like freedom. The air was fresh, the sky wide, and the waves gentle. Every morning, Gulliver treated the sailors. Small wounds, fevers, and seasickness. He cared for them all. They taught him how to tie knots, read the stars, and sing songs to the wind. He learned to live by rhythm, the rhythm of waves and work. But the sea is a teacher of balance. It gives peace one day and fear the next. Some nights were calm, full of stars like silver dust. Other nights, storms raged, and the ship groaned under black skies. Gulliver learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to move through it. He realized that being at sea was like life itself, beautiful, unpredictable, and humbling. When he stood on deck at sunset, he often thought of home. The golden light touched the sails, and the world looked endless. He missed his family, but he didn't feel lonely. He was part of something greater. That feeling of being small yet connected filled him with quiet joy. For many listeners today, Gulliver's First Voyage isn't just an old tale. It's a reminder of why we explore, not to escape life, but to understand it. Every journey starts with a decision to leave comfort behind. Gulliver left his home to learn about the world, but what he really discovered was himself. Travel changes us, not because of what we see, but because of how we see. When Gulliver sailed into the unknown, he carried more than medicine and supplies. He carried hope, curiosity, and courage. And those are the true tools of any explorer, then and now. His story reminds us that the first step is often the hardest. You don't need to cross oceans to find adventure. Sometimes it begins with a simple question: what if? That question, small, brave, and full of wonder, is the beginning of every great journey. The sea can be gentle, but it can also be cruel. Gulliver learned this truth one dark night. The sky turned gray, then black. The wind began to roar like an angry beast. At first, he thought it was only rain, but the waves grew higher, crashing hard against the ship. The deck tilted, ropes snapped, and sailors shouted to each other through the storm. The captain's voice tried to rise above the chaos, but even he sounded afraid. Rain poured like stones from the sky. The sea turned wild and white with foam. Every movement of the ship felt like a battle for survival. Gulliver held onto a rope, his hands burning, his heart racing. He had seen storms before, but never like this. The ocean was no longer a friend. It was a living force, powerful, unpredictable, and merciless. The mast cracked with a sound like thunder. Wood split. Water flooded in. The captain cried out, "Save yourselves! The ship is lost!" In that instant, Gulliver's thoughts flashed. His family, his dreams, the life he might never see again. He grabbed a broken plank and threw himself into the sea. The water was ice cold. Waves lifted him high, then dropped him low. He fought to breathe, swallowing salt and fear. He kicked and struggled, refusing to give in. There was no direction, no light, only darkness and noise. But something deep inside him whispered, "Keep going." And so he did. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time disappeared in the chaos. Then, through the blur of rain and foam, he saw it. Land. It was only a dark shape on the horizon, but it was hope. With what strength remained, he swam toward it, stroke by stroke. Each wave tried to pull him back, but he would not stop. At last, his feet touched sand. He crawled onto the shore, shaking, exhausted, alive. He lay face down on the wet ground, listening to the fading sound of the sea. For a long time he couldn't move. His body ached, his clothes heavy with water. But his heart beat on. He had survived the storm. In that moment of silence, Gulliver realized something profound. The sea had tested him. Not his body, but his spirit. Courage isn't about strength, it's about endurance, about refusing to surrender when the world turns dark. Many of us face storms, though not always with waves and wind. Our storms come in the form of fear, failure, or loss. Like Gulliver, we sometimes feel lost in the middle of nowhere. But if we keep moving, if we keep hope alive, we eventually find shore. That's the hidden lesson in this part of Gulliver's story. Survival isn't just about escaping danger. It's about finding meaning after the chaos ends. When he closed his eyes on that beach, Gulliver didn't just rest. He transformed from a traveler into a survivor. The storm may have destroyed the ship, but it gave him something far greater, a new beginning. And sometimes, that's what life does too. It breaks what we think we need, so we can discover what truly keeps us alive. When Gulliver opened his eyes, the storm was gone. The world was quiet, almost peaceful. He felt soft grass beneath him, warm sunlight on his face. For a moment he thought he was safe, but then, when he tried to move, he couldn't. Something held him down. His arms, legs, even his hair were tied to the ground. Thin ropes crossed over his body, dozens of them, strong and tight. At first he thought it was a dream. Then he felt something tiny move across his leg. Then another and another. Small feet, light but real. He lifted his head slightly and saw the strangest sight of his life. A man, no bigger than his thumb, was walking across his chest. He wore bright clothes, carried a tiny bow and arrow, and shouted in a high, quick voice. Soon dozens of little people surrounded him. They climbed up his arms, looked into his face, and pointed in amazement. Some carried spears, some gave orders. Others just stared at the giant lying before them. Gulliver froze. He didn't want to scare them. He realized that to them, he was the monster. One brave little man shot an arrow at his arm. It stung, but it didn't hurt much. It was a warning, a message that they were afraid. So Gulliver did the only thing he could. He stayed still, slowly. The arrows stopped. The people came closer. Their fear turned into curiosity. They studied his face, his hands, even his clothes. They spoke in fast, musical voices, a language he couldn't understand. One man, wearing a tiny crown, seemed to be their leader. He stood on Gulliver's chest and gave a long speech, waving his hands dramatically. Gulliver smiled gently, trying to show he meant no harm. That small gesture changed everything. The tiny people stopped shouting. Some laughed nervously. Others clapped their tiny hands. Then they brought him food. Little pieces of bread, drops of water, and tiny cups of wine. Gulliver ate and drank carefully, showing gratitude. The crowd cheered. The giant had become their guest, not their prisoner. As the sun set, he lay surrounded by hundreds of tiny figures. Their lights flickered like fireflies in the dusk. He felt wonder, confusion, and a strange kind of peace. He had survived the storm only to wake in a world where everything was small, except his sense of curiosity. This part of Gulliver's story feels magical, but it's also deeply human. It shows how fear can turn into understanding. At first, both sides were terrified, one of being crushed, the other of being attacked. But kindness bridged that gap. A smile, a soft tone, a sign of respect. Those things matter, even across worlds. Think about it. How often do we meet people different from us? Different size, culture, or belief, and our first reaction is fear. Yet, as Gulliver discovered, fear fades when we choose empathy over judgment. The land of Lilliput may be fictional, but its lesson is real. Understanding begins when we stop trying to dominate and start trying to connect. Gulliver's calmness saved him, but it also opened a door to friendship. So, next time you face something unfamiliar, remember the giant on the beach. Stay curious. Stay kind. Because sometimes the smallest people can teach us the biggest lessons. After the first shock faded, Gulliver's life in Lilliput began to change. The tiny people no longer feared him. They realized he wasn't a monster, but a gentle giant. Each day brought something new. New rules, new faces, and new ways to live in a miniature world. At first, he was still tied down, guarded by hundreds of tiny soldiers. They watched every move, arrows ready. But as time passed, they saw his kindness. He never harmed anyone, never resisted. He smiled, listened, and waited. And in return, their fear slowly turned into trust. One morning, the leader arrived, the Emperor of Lilliput. He was small, proud, and full of energy. His clothes glittered with gold. Yet when he looked at Gulliver, his eyes were sharp but curious. After a moment of silence, he lifted his hand. The soldiers lowered their bows. It was a sign of peace. From that day, Gulliver became a guest instead of a prisoner. The emperor ordered his people to feed him, a task that required hundreds of tiny hands. They carried barrels of wine no bigger than his cup and loaves of bread the size of pebbles. The sight made Gulliver laugh, but he ate politely. For them, feeding him was both an honor and a challenge. Soon he was free to walk around the city. Everywhere he went, crowds followed. Children, workers, even soldiers. They pointed, waved, and shouted in excitement. For the people of Lilliput, Gulliver was living proof that their world could be bigger than they imagined. But life in Lilliput wasn't just cute and funny. It was also full of contrasts. The houses looked like bird cages, the horses like cats, and the dogs like mice. Gulliver had to move carefully so he wouldn't crush anyone. He learned humility in every step, realizing how easy it is for the powerful to harm the small without meaning to. The children loved him most. They climbed onto his shoulders and laughed when he lifted them high. From up there, they could see their entire town, a city of wonder seen through a giant's eyes. Mothers watched nervously, then smiled when they saw how gentle he was. In that moment, size no longer mattered. Connection did. Gulliver also began to help the Lilliputians with their biggest challenges. For them, Moving a tree trunk took hundreds of men. For him, it took one hand. He carried heavy things, fixed walls, even helped pull ships into the harbor. To him, they were toy boats. To them, he was a miracle of strength. The emperor was delighted. He gave Gulliver the title Man Mountain and declared him a friend of Lilliput. People cheered in the streets, singing songs about their giant ally. For the first time, Gulliver felt like he truly belonged. Yet beneath the laughter and joy, he sensed something deeper, a reflection of human nature. Even in this tiny world, pride and ambition existed. The emperor's smile was warm, but his eyes still measured power. Gulliver began to see that every society, no matter how small, carries the same desires: control, fear, and hope. Life in Lilliput was more than a fantasy. It was a mirror. Through these little people, Gulliver saw the greatness and the weakness of humanity. He saw how compassion could unite and how pride could divide. It was a lesson wrapped in wonder, that kindness can build bridges where power builds walls. And maybe that's why this part of his story stays with us. Because sometimes the smallest worlds teach the biggest truths about what it means to be human. Peace in Lilliput never lasts long. At first, life was calm and full of joy. Gulliver helped the people, the emperor praised him, and the nation admired its giant friend. But power has a way of changing hearts, even in a tiny kingdom. One morning, whispers spread through the palace. The emperor was angry. He had learned that their neighboring island, Blefuscu, was preparing for war. The reason? A disagreement over how to break an egg. Yes, one nation believed you should break the small end first. The other, the big end. A silly argument, perhaps, but in their world, it had caused years of bloodshed. The emperor wanted victory, not peace. His pride was wounded, and he wanted to prove Lilliput's greatness. He turned to Gulliver. Man Mountain, he said, with your strength we can destroy Blefuscu forever. Gulliver hesitated. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to hurt anyone. But he also didn't want to displease the emperor who had treated him kindly. So, he made a decision, one that would test his values. He would help, but he would not kill. He would use his power to protect, not destroy. When the battle came, Gulliver walked into the sea. The water rose to his waist, but he kept moving. Ahead of him, the warships of Blefuscu waited like toy boats on the waves. He tied ropes around them one by one, while tiny sailors screamed in fear. To them, he was a sea monster. To Lilliput, a savior. With one great pull, he dragged the entire enemy fleet back to shore. The people of Lilliput cheered. The emperor danced in joy. It was the greatest victory their world had ever seen. And it was all because of one man's strength. But victory can be dangerous. The emperor's pride grew. He wanted more. Now, he said, capture the rest of their ships. Bring me their king. Make them our slaves. Gulliver stood silent. He looked at the small man before him, crowned and shining with ambition. And he said softly, Your Majesty, you are safe now. Let there be peace. The emperor's smile faded. His eyes turned cold. He didn't understand Gulliver's refusal. To him, power meant control. To Gulliver, power meant responsibility. That difference became a wall between them, a wall that no kindness could climb. From that day, something changed. The emperor no longer called him friend. He looked at Gulliver with suspicion, fear, even jealousy. The people still loved their giant hero, but politics had begun to poison the air. Gulliver could feel the tension rising, like a quiet storm waiting to break. This chapter of his journey is more than a story about war. It's a reflection on human nature, how pride can blind reason, and how even noble hearts can turn cold with ambition. Lilliput, with its tiny people and tiny conflicts, was a mirror of our own world. It showed that size doesn't change what's inside the heart. Whether small or great, we all wrestle with the same desires: power, pride, and peace. Gulliver's choice to stand for peace was not weakness, it was wisdom. He understood that true strength isn't in conquering others, but in mastering oneself. And maybe that's the hardest kind of victory, the one that leaves no one defeated. So when you think of this part of Gulliver's journey, think beyond the battle. Think about the choice between pride and compassion. Because in the end, every heart, no matter how small, has to choose which side it's on. For a while after the great victory, Gulliver lived as a hero in Lilliput. Songs were written about him. Children played games in his honor, and the people adored their giant protector. But behind the smiles, danger was quietly growing. The emperor had not forgotten Gulliver's refusal to conquer Blefuscu completely. His pride was wounded, and his heart had turned cold. At first, he hid it behind polite words and royal smiles. But envy is a slow fire. It burns quietly before it destroys. Gulliver noticed the change. The palace felt different. The emperor no longer visited him as often. The ministers whispered when he passed. He sensed that his great size, once a blessing, had become a threat. One night, a friend from the royal court came to him in secret. "Be careful," the man whispered. "The emperor is planning against you." At first, Gulliver could not believe it. "Why?" he asked. "I have done nothing but serve him." But his friend's eyes were full of fear. "That's the problem," he said. "You are too powerful." In secret meetings, the emperor's advisors had made a plan. They would put Gulliver on trial and punish him for treason. Not with death. That would be too quick. Their plan was crueler. They wanted to blind him. A blind giant, harmless but humiliated, forever trapped in their control. When Gulliver learned this, his heart trembled. He thought of the people who loved him, the children who laughed when he passed. He could not believe that kindness had turned to betrayal. But deep down, he knew he had to act. If he stayed, he would lose everything, even his sight. He waited for the right night. The moon was bright, the guards sleepy. He pretended to be weak, to have accepted his fate. Then, silently, he rose, careful not to shake the ground. Step by step, he walked out of the city, through the fields, until he reached the sea. There, by some miracle, he saw a small boat on the shore, perhaps left behind by sailors from Blefuscu. To the Lilliputians, it was huge. To Gulliver, it was just the right size. He worked quickly, patching holes with wood and cloth, shaping long oars from tree trunks. For days he hid by the shore, repairing the vessel and waiting for the right wind. When dawn came, he pushed the boat into the water. The sea welcomed him again, vast, dangerous, but free. Behind him, Lilliput faded into the distance, its towers shrinking until they vanished completely. He looked back once more, remembering the laughter, the lessons, and the pain. He had entered their world as a giant, but he was leaving as something greater, a man who understood the cost of power. Days later, as he floated across the open sea, a ship appeared on the horizon. He waved his arms, shouting for help. The sailors spotted him and brought him aboard. They listened in disbelief as he told his story of tiny people, great wars, and fragile pride. They laughed. Some called it fantasy. But Gulliver simply smiled. He didn't need them to believe. For him, the truth was not about size or distance, but about human nature. He had seen how small people could be in heart, even when great in ambition. and he had learned that freedom is not given, it is earned, often at the price of trust. This chapter of Gulliver's life is about letting go of anger, of fear, of illusions. It's about knowing when to walk away. Sometimes leaving is not failure, it's wisdom, because there are moments when peace cannot be found in staying, only in setting sail again. And so, the man who once healed sailors and carried kingdoms set out once more into the unknown. The sea, his oldest teacher, was waiting for him, patient, endless, and full of new lessons to come. Gulliver's journey did not end when he left Lilliput. If anything, that escape marked a new beginning. The sea called to him again, vast, mysterious, and full of possibilities. He had seen one strange world, and now he wanted to see more. After months at home, he felt restless. England was safe, predictable, and small. His heart still beat to the rhythm of the ocean. So once again, Gulliver set sail, this time into adventures even stranger than before. His next voyage took him to Brobdingnag, a land where everything was reversed. Here, Gulliver was the tiny one. The people, the animals, even the insects towered above him. To the giants, he was no more than a toy, something to study and laugh at. He lived in the home of a kind farmer and his gentle daughter, who cared for him like a pet. At first, he felt humiliated. The giant hand that once applauded him in Lilliput now treated him like a curiosity. But over time, he began to understand something deeper. Perspective changes everything. In Lilliput, power had made him proud. In Brobdingnag, weakness made him humble. He learned that both strength and fragility can teach us who we are. The Queen of Brobdingnag often asked him about England. When he proudly described his country's politics, wars, and inventions, she frowned. "To us," she said softly, "your people sound clever, but cruel." Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. From that land of giants, Gulliver carried home a new understanding. He saw humanity's greatness and its foolishness side by side. We can build empires, yet struggle to master our own hearts. But the sea wasn't done with him yet. Another voyage led him to a floating island called Laputa, a world ruled by thinkers and dreamers. Its people lived in the sky, obsessed with numbers, stars, and theories. They could calculate everything, but they understood nothing about life below. They ignored their families, forgot simple joys, and lost touch with the ground. Gulliver admired their intelligence, but pitied their detachment. Knowledge without empathy, he realized, can make us blind. Sometimes, wisdom is not about knowing more. It's about feeling more. After many more travels, strange lands, strange people, endless lessons, Gulliver finally reached a place that changed him forever. The land of the Houyhnhnms. There, horses ruled, noble, calm, and wise. They lived by reason and harmony, without lies, greed, or violence. Among them were creatures that looked human, but behaved like beasts, the Yahoos. At first, Gulliver was horrified by the Yahoos. They were filthy, selfish, and wild, a reflection of everything ugly in mankind. But as he stayed longer, he saw the truth that hurt the most. The Yahoos were not monsters from another world. They were mirrors of humanity. The Houyhnhnms taught Gulliver what true intelligence means. Not cleverness, but virtue. They showed him a society built on honesty, reason, and compassion. For the first time, he felt peace. Not the peace of comfort, but of understanding. When he finally left that land, he was no longer the same man. He had crossed oceans, met kings and monsters, But the greatest discovery was within himself. He realized that every place he visited reflected a piece of humanity, our pride, our ignorance, our potential for good. This part of Gulliver's story isn't just about travel. It's about reflection, about seeing our world through the eyes of someone who has seen it all. And maybe that's why his journeys still matter, because every voyage, real or imagined, reminds us that exploration begins not on the map, but in the mind. The sea gave Gulliver many lands, but each one brought him closer to one truth. To understand the world, we must first learn to understand ourselves. When Gulliver finally returned home, the sea was quiet. The noise of the waves was gone, but their echo stayed in his heart. He had traveled through worlds of giants, scholars, and horses of wisdom. Yet what he found was not about them. It was about us. He learned that greatness has nothing to do with size, and intelligence means nothing without kindness. He saw that pride divides, but empathy connects. And he understood that every person, no matter how small, carries a universe within. In the end, Gulliver's journey wasn't about escaping the world. It was about seeing it more clearly. And maybe that's the lesson we all need, to travel far enough, in body or in mind, to finally come home to ourselves.